Welcome to Shadows of Progress. I'm your host, Riya, and today we're lifting more than just weight. We're lifting the layers around what it means to be a woman of strength, both in body and in spirit. My guest today needs little introduction. Ms. Farhanna Farid, Singapore's record-breaking powerlifter, a force who has rewritten what's possible on the platform and off it. Ms. Farhanna, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start at the beginning, not on the stage, but long before that. What first drew you to powerlifting? Was there a particular moment when you realized that I belong here?
Well, I guess it was a series of fortunate and unfortunate events that led me to powerlifting. So I was actually doing long distance running prior to me taking up powerlifting, but I kept breaking up injuries and I needed to do rehab. So then my boyfriend then and husband now was such a gym rat. So all of our dates centered around the gym. So I was curious, like what's so great about the gym? Why are you spending so much time at the gym? So that led me to checking out the space. And I wasn't a total natural from the beginning, actually. Strength training was very intimidating to me at the start. And I guess you could say, almost like a typical girl who enters the gym and would just kind of gravitate towards the cardio machines. So the racks, the power lifting side, the barbells, dumbbells weren't exactly my comfort zone. I took to deadlifting quite quickly and naturally, but for squat and bench, I actually really struggled in the beginning. But then I really enjoyed the process of fine-tuning my form and feeling strong and capable week to week. So it wasn't until I became a coach years later where I realized that, oh, you know what? I could actually pay it forward and contribute by passing on whatever I learned. And that's where I felt like I found my purpose. And that's where I felt like, you know what, maybe this is something that I was meant to do for now, at least.
Okay. Yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying because even at our school, the girls often hesitate to go towards the weights. It's more
Exactly.
around the cardio machines. Yeah.
Yeah.
So because strength sports often challenge the idea of what's feminine.
Mhm.
So when you first started, did you face those stereotypes or comments about how women shouldn't lift or that you'd start looking like a man? Or how did you navigate that space emotionally and mentally?
Definitely. So some came from a place of concern of my health. So for example, like even my mom was quite worried. Like she was concerned if heavy lifting would have detrimental effects to my productive health, like was I able to have a baby after lifting for so long? And I realized is those who don't know better, who may have those sort of negative preconceived notions, those who know and lift themselves know that it's actually really hard to get big and would compliment me for my physique because they know how much effort that takes. But personally, even for myself, it actually took a while for me to get used to the gain in muscle mass because I was not used to quote unquote packing on that much muscles. I couldn't fit into some clothes. Or when I looked back in old photos, I could see that I have, gotten bigger. Not necessarily worse though. And it helped that I had such a supportive partner. Like he celebrated me for my strength achievements and capabilities, not how I looked. So it was when I started appreciating how strong and capable I felt was when I actually felt most confident in my own skin.
So behind every record, there's a story the crowd often doesn't see. So what have been some of the toughest moments in your journey, the shadows behind the medals?
Well, the struggle can be a daily one, like especially for someone who competes as often as 4 to 6 times a year, like I do. So I'm almost always in season and prepping for a comp. So everything I do or eat has to be purposeful and intended towards, keeping myself comp ready. So aside from tracking all my food, even when I eat out, like activities that I do can't be too risky since I don't want to compromise my prep. So I'm also not in town several times a year. So that means I've missed family trips and social events. So that can be isolating. So it helps to have your own tribe, your own support system. But also, I think with most sports athletes who push themselves to their limit, like pain and discomfort is no stranger, right? I realize I have to have a baseline willingness to put up with discomfort on a regular basis, and not a lot of people realize that. Like I'm in discomfort and in pain sometimes when in training, but I need to be okay with it. I need to be willing to put up with it. Of course, it's a calculated risk. Like I won't push myself to a point of injury. And the first time I actually injured my back was in 2023. So it was a nerve impingement, and it felt like someone tasered my back every time I turned or bent down to put on my socks. It was 2 months out from a world championship, and I had the choice to pull out, but I decided I wanted a fighting chance. I had to kind of like scale back training for about 3 to 4 weeks, saw my physio to get dry needled a few times a week, and made the most out of the few weeks left. And then we ended up breaking a world record that competition.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Thank you. So that's a really powerful perspective because we often glorify the highlight reel without seeing the cost of sustaining excellence.
Yeah.
Your case, like how you've mentioned that after your injury, what did the recovery and resilience process look like physically and emotionally?
It was hard because like those who've gotten injured will know like not the physical pain that's hard to overcome. It's actually the mental and psychological part of it, right? Like your body goes into defensive mode and it's just out of sheer survival. Like it just doesn't want to get hurt again. And that can be really quite depressing because you're on the sideline while you're recovering and you see your competitors getting stronger and they're powering on, they're hitting certain numbers during training. So it can be really quite demoralizing. But what I realized was that sometimes resilience just looks simply like just showing up and going through the motion. So there were weeks where I would go to the gym to just walk on the treadmill. Like walking was part of my rehab and I couldn't lift any weights. So, but I knew that I needed to go through that to get to the next stage and I needed to be disciplined with that. So literally showing up, going through the motion and mentally and physically, like I might feel pretty battered, but the body can be amazing when you're committed to a cause, right? And I realized ever since then, recovery has to be a proactive one instead of a reactive one. So now this means that I'm scheduling physio or massage sessions like every 3 weeks before something happens.
Yes. So, as you mentioned, I think really consistency is key, and it's very important to be proactive in keeping your health and keeping like your mental and physical health proper.
Exactly.
So, let's talk about that iconic moment, breaking the world record. You've lifted over 200 kilos, literally carrying more than 3 times your body weight. So, what was going through your mind when you pulled that lift? And what did that victory feel like?
Well, it was actually 4 times, more than 4 times my body weight, actually. Honestly, I think I go through a flow state where I'm in the zone and I don't quite process everything until it's at the end when I drop the bar back down. And the first feeling that comes rushing is always relief. It's not happiness, it's not exactly joy, it's always relief, relief that everything that we have worked towards had paid off. Like it wasn't just effort on my part, but effort on my handlers and my coaches and my nutritionists and my physios, and everything has culminated to that point and it was all worth it. So, and it never gets old. It's always surreal every time you get those white lights at the end of your lift.
It must have been incredible. But I imagine that the real power lies in not just the number, but kind of what it represents. Do you see those milestones as personal achievements or as collective ones for women in sport?
I suppose both now. I never really thought what I do or achieve may have implications to others. But now when I hear stories of people feeling inspired after hearing about me, I realize there are ripple effects, that my achievements can bring. I guess because it doesn't just showcase numbers for what they are, like you said, there's the element of discipline, resilience, determination, and consistency, like you mentioned. And these are things that people can relate to in their own endeavors, and doesn't have to be powerlifting.
Yes. So, powerlifting is often seen as a male dominated sport, even though strength has no gender. So, from your experience, why do you think there are still fewer women in the space? And do you think it's about access or opportunity or a deeper cultural mindset about what women should do and look like?
We have definitely evolved. Like when I first started, there was very, very few women lifting. And now you see considerably more, but I think there's still room for growth. More often than not, strength training is sort of like a rite of passage for young males, right? Like they kind of it's part of, I don't know, their like macho growth or something. So most of them get exposed to it early on, unlike us, like unlike our female counterparts. It's not exactly part of our growth milestones. So it could be that. And that's something that could change. For powerlifting itself though, I feel Like intrinsically, there's no bias in terms of access and opportunities. There's an equal number of male and female athletes who can represent the national team, for example. And in fact, in our local scene, we have more women have more competing opportunities because we also host like women only meet, and the men can't be a part of that, obviously. So we actually have more opportunities now, maybe versus back then. So I would say the barrier would come from a societal and personal level. So there needs to be a further mindset shift, and which is sort of progressing in the right direction. I think we're on the right trajectory. Like I mentioned, you see more women lifting now, and there are actually days where I train and I only see women at the racks and platforms, which is very nice to see and is very promising, but maybe not so much on a competition level, because perhaps they feel like, to benefit the most out of powerlifting, they don't need to compete because maybe it's still out of their comfort zone. But there's also beauty in sort of stretching your comfort zone, right? So perhaps that's something we need to expose more women to.
Yeah. So you've kind of mentioned how in our local community there's a lot more women. So do you think that Singapore has like evolved more in terms of like country basis? And do you think that inequality still exists more in other countries in powerlifting?
Well, based on what I can see and based on what I've witnessed personally, I think it's sort of growing everywhere. Like, I don't see a drop in participation. If anything, I see more and more women competing. And not only that, they are competing quite consistently. So they're not like one-hit wonders where I'll see this one person maybe in 1 year and then she'll stop competing completely. But I tend to see them in subsequent years, and that's how we form our community. So I think Singapore is making progress, but other countries around us, even on an Asian, Southeast Asia level, I think there's been recognition that this is crucial and integral for society growth, and that people are actually pushing for growth in women in strength sports.
Yeah. So you've kind of mentioned how the barriers for young women aren't exactly structural, like they might not have trouble in funding or access to opportunity, but do you think there might still be a bias in like family and like how much support they receive from family?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, it might be because of certain, I guess, legacy expectations that the previous generation holds on to, right? And the previous generation would consist of their parents. And it's simply because they're just not exposed to it. They just don't know better. Like, say, for example, my generation onwards, when we have kids, I would think we would have greater tolerances to, say, women doing strength sports. But I think there's still room for education to create awareness and debunk detrimental myths, for example. So on top of that, then we'll need to educate the younger generation and to empower them and guide them to strong futures. So personally, for me, I actually hope for schools to introduce strength sports, even on a primary school level, like teaching kids how to control and use their body to lift efficiently, not necessarily to lift heavy, but it's more of a safety point of view, and maybe even gym etiquettes. Like, it seems like eventually everyone would end up going to a gym at least once in their lives. It would help to learn the gym etiquette so that, we create a more wholesome and less disruptive community, if you may. But also, I guess, maybe there are certain elements missing and the structural point of view, not saying missing, but maybe something that we can continue to strengthen would be things like safeguards, that are necessary to protect the safety of females in the federation, for example, on the federation and coaches level, so that, our own female athletes will feel safe to express themselves as strength athletes.
Yes. So when you've become face of progress, people, especially for women in sport, people often celebrate the success, but not the pressure that comes with that. So do you ever feel the expectation to represent others adds an invisible weight to what beyond why and what you lift in competition? And how do you manage that responsibility?
Well, 100% actually. Like, pressure is a double-edged sword, isn't it? And especially if you don't know how to handle it or when it gets overwhelming. So I've had to learn and find ways to sort of convert that pressure into psych, like and power, I guess. Because to me, if so many people believe in what I'm capable of, there's no reason for me to doubt myself at all. Like, that's enough. Like, I don't need further conviction of my capabilities. And I've also had to remind myself to live for myself first and foremost, and why I'm doing this. Because, I love the sport because of how it makes me feel whole and makes me feel capable, and it gives me purpose. So I think for as long as powerlifting gives me joy, I can see myself doing this for a long and extended period of time, hopefully as long as my body holds up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my last question for you is, if you could go back and speak to your younger self, maybe the version of you just starting out, stepping into a gym for the first time, what would you say to her now?
I would tell her to be kind to herself and enjoy the journey, not the numbers. Everyone starts somewhere, right? Enjoy when the numbers are still light, because there'll be days later on where you'll wish you didn't lift so heavy. I would also tell her to embrace her weaknesses instead of avoiding that. Like, the sooner you embrace your weaknesses, the sooner you're able to turn them into strengths, or find a way to leverage off them. And the sooner you feel like you've really come into your own.
Yes, that's amazing. I think your story is really a reminder that strength isn't just physical, it's about patience, identity, and purpose. Miss Farhanna, thank you so much for joining me today on Shadows of Progress. Your story shines a light on what it truly means to push boundaries, not just in sport, but how we define empowerment. For listeners, remember, every lift begins with a moment of doubt, and every shadow can reveal new strength. Thank you so much, Miss Farhanna.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and sharing my story.